Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Hey, welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. Great to have you with us on YouTube. And when you're on YouTube, by the way, don't forget to hit that subscribe button too, because there's a lot going on here, and your support is greatly appreciated. All right, on today's show, I am loath to do this, but I'm going to do this as a public service. Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party have released it's about a 2.5-minute video that he recorded apparently right in Windsor, right across the river from Detroit, I guess, because he wants to talk about the auto industry. And the reason I am loath to do this, I think I've been pretty clear about how I feel about Pierre Poilievre as a politician and somebody who claims to have Canada's best interests at heart. And running anything with Poilievre in it where he's spewing his stuff here is, to me, it's akin to like somebody who dumpster dives, going into a dumpster behind a restaurant hoping to find something nutritious to eat. You rarely find anything nutritious, and you get covered in smell and everything else. And I feel that way after I watch Poilievre talk for any length of time. So I've girded myself for that today because it's going to happen in some way, shape, or form. But I think it's important that we do watch what's going on and talk about this, and especially because, as I've talked about in the podcast many times, I'm extremely disappointed as somebody who was in the media in this country for many, many years, well, about 50 years, I guess, before the radio industry started to die. It bothers me to see that there is little to no accountability. Media people, those that are left, journalists, some of them call themselves, seem loath to be able to question our political leaders and to say, whoa, that's wrong, that's just untrue. They'd rather just let it ride. And of course, by doing that, silence is compliance, right? And that bothers me. So I'm not going to do that with Poilievre. I'm going to stop this video if I've got something to say, and I've got a lot to say. I've taken some notes on this. So without any further ado here, let's get into the video right now, and we'll talk about what Mr. Poilievre thinks is the message that Canadians want to hear. Here we go.
No place better symbolizes the Canada-U.S. tug-of-war for auto jobs than the river separating Detroit from Windsor. A tug-of-war that has intensified as President Trump has made clear he wants our auto sector and our auto jobs. Now, of course, Mark Carney promised that he could, quote, handle Trump, that he could, quote, negotiate a win, and that he would have a deal by July 21st. Well, here we are. It's almost November, and there's no deal. No win, no elbows, and increasingly, no jobs.
The Prime Minister did have a very optimistic outlook about that back in the spring, just after the last election, due to a large part about the fact that there seemed to be some sense of agreement between the negotiating team from the Americans and from the Canadians. Now, we have found out subsequent to that the reason these negotiations broke off is because the Americans, as we've talked about on the podcast, were simply demanding. They were not looking for fairness in any of these negotiations. They were basically saying, this is the way it's going to be. These are the tariffs. You're going to damn well pay them, and you're going to like it. And as we talked about on a previous podcast, other nations, the UK, the European Union, others have simply caved into that and said, okay, fine. He was going to charge us 50%, and now it's only going to be 20%. It's a win. No, it's not a win. And I give our negotiators credit for not buckling to that. They say, well, Canada's not serious. Canada's damn serious about the negotiations, Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Ludnick and all the people that are on the other side of the table, which kind of reminds me, I feel as if the negotiations were all going right now and Poilievre was there, he'd probably be on the same side of the table as Ludnick. But anyway, we are damn serious about what's going on, and we are not going to get taken for a ride like so many other nations have. That's the reason there's no deal done. It has nothing at all to do with the Prime Minister's intransigence in any of these issues. More importantly, the fact that there's no deal and the fact that the Prime Minister has said time and time again, no deal is better than a bad deal. And I agree with that, and I think most Canadians agree with that, is because Carney will not cave in. He's not going to give Canadians to throw any workers, auto workers, or anybody else under the bus just to say, I got a deal. And that's what the kind of leadership that we're looking for here. So anyway, let me get back to Mr. Poilievre, because I'm sure he's going to get a little deeper into the doo-doo here when he starts talking about his perspective on this. Go ahead.
He was going to build an all-in-Canada network of automotive production. Since that time, what we have seen is the tragic loss of so many jobs. Just recently, Stellantis announced it was moving operations from a 3,000 worker plant in Brampton. And of course, there's been about 1,000 workers who lost their jobs at the CAMI plant in Ingersoll, and another 700 workers in Oshawa that have lost their jobs. Meanwhile, GM has announced that it's making $4 billion of investment in the U.S. Stellantis, $13 billion of investment. That's money leaving Canada to go to the United States of America, making them richer and us poorer.
All right, let's stop there. Let's talk a little bit about that, okay? First of all, though, that's not Canadian money, Mr. Poilievre, though that's money from the American automakers themselves. But let's talk about those numbers because they're important, and you know, that's in the news these days. The Stellantis announcement about the Brampton plant, and certainly, of course, the General Motors announcement about the CAMI plant in Ingersoll. Again, you want to lay the blame for everything at Mark Carney, which is a rather naive and frankly incorrect attitude towards this. Those were business decisions. And as to the point about the government trying to move toward an all-Canadian interactive automaking industry here, first of all, we were already along that road. And the deals were struck to make that happen, including the deal with the federal government, the Ontario government, with Stellantis, to do with the Brampton plant, including General Motors and the CAMI plant in Ingersoll. Those were deals. That was part of the strategy. And the deals were signed, sealed, and delivered. We covered that. You saw, I'm sure everybody saw the news coverage of that. You know, there was Doug Ford and there was the Prime Minister at that time signing those deals, and those were the representatives from Stellantis and the representatives from GM, all happy and smiles. This is going to be great. This is going to work out for everybody. We're going to make the vehicles here, Canadian jobs, and you know, everything is just hunky-dory. Stellantis backed out. Our government didn't back out. Stellantis backed out. They reneged on a deal, which is something Donald Trump does on a daily basis. General Motors reneged on their deal. When they signed that deal and got a ton of money, by the way, from the Canadian government, both of them did, both Stellantis and GM, there was a commitment there. And they have not honored their commitment. They took the money and ran. And now it looks as if they're going to invest at least part of that money into their U.S. operations. That's total BS, and that has nothing at all to do with the government messing anything up here. We had a deal. And anybody who's ever signed a contract, I don't care what it is, even if it's a mortgage, that's a contract, okay? If you don't fulfill your end of the deal, you're reneging on the deal, and that's exactly what's happened here, Mr. Poilievre. It's not the government's fault. Blame Stellantis and blame General Motors for basically turning their backs on a commitment that they made. How can you possibly do business with a company that basically says, yeah, well, we didn't really mean it. Just give me the money. It's gut-wrenching that that's happening, but there's a reason for that happening. I'll get back to you in just a minute, Mr. Poilievre. I want to bring up another story that I think is very much related to this, and it's a story that came to our attention just about 24 hours ago. Let's put that headline up. It has to do with government reaction to this, and the story it basically says that according to some of the business leaders, Canadian business leaders, that is, they're now urging the Canadian government to rethink our strategy about the U.S. auto incentives and to expand or not to expand, as the case might be. And there's a number of people that have weighed in on this. Golda Hare is also from the Business Council of Canada. But there's a factor here that came into play here that I think is extremely important. We'll run that headline and give you the gist of the story here, because it talks about the money that's coming from the American government, which I think in no small way was a major factor in these policies being basically reneged upon by Stellantis and by General Motors. All right. American manufacturers are seeing unexpected reprieve from the impact of tariffs after the White House, Trump's White House, updated its policies. Now, what they're doing here is extending a 3.75% rebate on the manufacturer's suggested retail price for domestically assembled vehicles. That's until 2030, so for the next number of years. In its third quarter earnings call, Ford Motor Company said the move is going to save over $1 billion in expected tariff costs. General Motors thanked the president effusively for their quarterly update. U.S. automakers are moving their operations from Canada to Mexico into the United States are not only saving on duty costs, but now they're being compensated and subsidized by the Trump government. You get what's happening here? You get why all of a sudden General Motors and Stellantis say, yeah, Canada, sorry, we're leaving now. Because, yes, they're being affected by the tariffs that Trump has imposed, and it's killing them. It's hurting their business. But the Trump government has now said, okay, we'll offer a rebate on the vehicles that you sell. So basically, their profit margins are going to increase as a result of this. Yeah, they're still going to pay the tariffs, although Trump, still doesn't want to admit that it's those companies that are actually paying the tariffs. But now they have a windfall. So, they're going to basically publish record numbers of sales and profits, but it's not real profit. The government, the U.S. government, the Trump government, is subsidizing the auto industry, basically saying we'll cover the cost of this. And that's the incentive for these companies to basically tear up existing agreements. Now, I don't know what they're doing with the Mexican government. Doesn't much matter to us, I guess, because we're more concerned about what's happening with Canada. But that's the way the Trump team operates. Basically, they're throwing money, even though they have the largest deficit and debt in the history of that country. But Trump is simply throwing money at the auto industry down there to make sure that they come back across the border and do all their production there. So my question to you, let me swing back to Mr. Poilievre here. What the hell did you expect the government to do about this? Do we open the checkbook and simply say, oh, no, we'll match that? No, that's blackmail. If Trump is going to play dirty pool like that and basically bribe the automakers, well, first of all, shame on Trump, but the man has no shame. But secondly, shame on the automakers for basically turning their back on an existing agreement with the Canadian government simply because Trump is waving a few dollars in their face right now. It's all about money. It's all about profits. And it's all about, well, to hell with you. If I can make more money going around the corner to that guy or back across the border to that guy, that's what they're going to do. And that's what's happening. And that's what's underpinning the negotiations that are happening between Canada and the United States. And, of course, all we hear here are the headlines that, from the Americans that saying, well, the Canadians aren't being serious about that. Yeah, they are. But how do you, when somebody's cheating like that and somebody's throwing money under the table on the other side to try to sway their support, how do you battle that sort of thing? It's an impossible task. That's the sort of thing that the Canadian government is up against. Now, Poilievre doesn't give a damn about that because Poilievre has his own agenda, and we'll talk about that in just a couple of seconds. So let me just clarify that point, and we'll get back to Mr. Poilievre's rant here and talk some more about that. So this is a little bit more of what he has to say by the Canadian border here as he looks out across the skyline of Detroit in the background. Here we go.
And shattering into smithereens the promises Mark Carney made to those workers that he would protect their jobs. Of course, he made promises that no one could ever keep, and he broke promises that he should have been able to direct. We needed to focus on the things we can control on the Canadian side of the border. For example, the government's plan to ban internal combustion engines, gas and diesel-powered vehicles is already killing jobs, even though it's not yet implemented. Because, of course,
time out, Mr. Poilievre. The legislation that you're referring to is not to ban combustion engines. It's to encourage the production and sale of EVs. And this was something that was crafted after consultation with the industry and with other governments, and it was a win-win situation. Environmentalists, but certainly even the industry applauded this. And keep in mind, by the way, this same, he's going to say in just a couple of seconds here that there's no such restriction in the States. There was. Under the Biden administration, they passed very similar legislation setting targets for EV production and EV sales. Trump, of course, just ripped everything up because he doesn't believe there's any environmental issues at all. Let's burn coal. Let's have combustion engines. Who gives a damn what's going up into the environment? And that's, of course, the attitude that Poilievre and the Conservatives have when it comes to the environment. They're blindly pretending that there's no such thing as an environmental concern here about what we're doing to our planet and to our environment or the air that we're breathing. And that's really, I think, the foundation for everything he's saying here. But I want to be clear about this idea about EVs. When those announcements were made, the industry jumped on side. As a matter of fact, the industry were the innovators in this. They saw the future. And we ran, back to my radio days, and we've talked about this on the podcast, we ran clips and statements from all the major automakers, their presidents, their boards of directors, applauding this and saying EVs are the future. We've got to move aggressively in this direction. And it happened here in Ontario, where we are, with major announcements from GM, from Ford, and from Stellantis about auto production. The Oshawa plant, which was closed arbitrarily years and years ago, all of a sudden was going to be retooled. Same thing with the Brampton plant. Same thing with the Oakville plant. That's still up in the air, what's happening in Oakville, because we haven't really heard from Ford. As we broadcast this today, Ford still has a commitment, and I use the term loosely, with the plant in Oakville. But the reality here is the industry was driving this. And they said, yes, it's about time. And the government, well, except for the Ontario government, but many governments here in this province and in this country and many states south of the border offered incentives to try to encourage that. So that's the foundation for that. That's the reality here. It's not a ban on combustion engines, okay? There was a standard that was set, a quota that was set for instance, for the next 5 years and 10 years, et cetera. Nobody says you can't buy a combustion engine. They're still going to be made, and you can still buy one, and there's no penalty for it. So, again, Poilievre is misleading the public with his different skewing of exactly what's going on here. So let's be clear about what's actually happening, as opposed to the false reality that Poilievre was talking about. Okay, I'll let you carry on there, Mr. Poilievre.
An investment in a plant, you're not going to do it if that plant is going to be banned or severely penalized by a government mandate 3 or 4 years down the road. In fact, you'd move it to another place like the US where there is no such mandate. Conservatives believe that Canadian business and workers decide what cars to make, and Canadian consumers should decide what cars to buy. In other words, get rid of the mandate and put you back in the driver's seat on the vehicles you choose to drive.
All right, just jump in just a second here. Just a second there, Mr. Poilievre. Here's the other aspect of this, too. There was investment, as we talked about, major investment from the automakers and from others, including parts manufacturers, into EVs. They saw the future. As myopic as Mr. Poilievre himself might be about the future of this planet and the future of that industry, EVs were the future. And we looked at Europe and we looked at other parts of the world where this was already happening. So that investment was there. It was there by the industry itself because they wanted this to happen. This was not something the government was forcing on them. This was something that was done collectively to try to encourage that industry. And they talked about how they were going to retrain workers, and auto workers were going to have jobs for years and years and years to come. These were happy days until all of a sudden the Orange Menace got reelected in the United States. And basically we went from 2015 all the way down to now it's 1914 again, when it comes to environmental issues and to production. It's pretty damn scary what's been happening here with the attitude south of the border. And, of course, we already know that Mr. Poilievre is really simply a mini-me of Donald Trump. Whatever Trump says and does, of course, he has to mimic up here. So it does not surprise me at all that he wants to scrap any environmental concerns with industry and simply say, let's go back to the old days where we're, evoking, the combustion engines and burning of coal, and let's get rid of all the environmental agencies and all the controls that we've tried to put in place because we're smarter now. At least I guess not all of us are smarter, but as a society, I think we're a lot smarter about this. So as opposed to reverting back to the old days, of course, that the conservatives, I guess, continually want to pull us back into right now. And that's the underpinning for basically his concern here. Is he doesn't want anything to do with the environment. They don't believe in that. We saw that happen during the last federal election campaign. That let's just have a Wild West free-for-all here. Build what you want, do what you want, and as what happens to the environment, well, we'll worry about that later. Anyway, go ahead, Mr. Poilievre. You're on a roll here, so to speak.
Are Carney's taxes. He's got an industrial carbon tax that applies to almost everything that goes into making an automobile. The plastics, the rubber, the steel, and the other metals that could potentially be produced or altered or changed are all more expensive because of an industrial carbon tax that does not exist on the American side of the border, but does on our side. This drives production and paychecks out of our country. Let's get rid of the entire carbon tax for everyone, for everything, for good. Let's cut tax on investment by allowing people to reinvest, businesses to reinvest their capital gains tax-free as long as it's invested here in Canada. In fact, let's take all taxes off of Canadian-made automobiles so that our consumers have an incredible incentive to buy Canadian. We need to fight for our workers, fight for our people and our production. We need to start to put Canadian business, Canadian workers, and Canadian quality of life first. In fact, let's put Canada first.
All right. Very cute ending. I don't know who wrote it for him because it certainly didn't come from his heart. We have been trying to put Canada first, and that seemed to be the theme, of course, of the Carney administration in the short time that they've been in power right now. Mr. Poilievre, actions speak louder than words. Okay, talk is cheap when it comes to Poilievre. This that ending there, let's put Canada first, kind of reminded me of the rather scathing letter he wrote to Carney before they went down to Washington to do some negotiating. Where he basically said, you've screwed this up and screwed this up and screwed this up, but we're all cheering for you. BS. No, he's not cheering for Canada. He's not cheering for us to get a good deal. He wants them to fail because he wants to be the prime minister. And that's what it comes down to. And that's, I think, very, very telling. The timing of this so-called release of Mr. Poilievre's rant there on the border is not to be taken lightly. We're just a couple of days away from the budget being presented in the Canadian Parliament. And, of course, after that will be the budget vote. And this is a minority government. And there's a real concern right now that the budget may or may not pass. It's a finance bill. So if it were to fail, there's a very real possibility the government would be defeated and would have to call an election, which would mean, a second election in this year. I don't like the idea, and most Canadians don't like the idea, but Mr. Poilievre, of course, I think is just rubbing his hands in glee. It's this lust he has for power, I think, overrides just about everything he's doing. So as we look at what Poilievre is doing here, and as I said at the beginning of our conversation, I always feel like I'm dumpster diving when I go and listen to what Poilievre has said. Mr. Carney is trying to counteract all of this stuff. The folks at Ecos Polling, one of the great polling companies in this country, came up with a question that I think is very germane to what's going on, and I think relates directly to what Poilievre was talking about here, too. Would Canadians want to see an election? In other words, let's put that up on the screen. This is the question. Federal opposition parties should vote against the upcoming federal budget this fall, triggering a fall election. Agree or disagree? And as you can see, in the dark color is people who disagree with that. The lighter color, the yellow, is people who want to see an election, want to see the government fall. Well, the numbers, the overall numbers, we'll get to some of those are the breakdown by political affiliation right now. By a 2-to-1 margin, Canadians are saying, no, don't bring an election. Don't bring the government down. We don't want another election. 54% said they do not want an election. They do not want the government to fall because of this budget. 27% thinks it would be a great idea. And when you look at the breakdown here on the numbers, let's look at the polling here. Nationally, as we say, 54% said don't call it an election, don't cause an election. 27% would love to see it. Look at that Conservative Party number, okay? 69% of the Conservative people that we support said, yeah, bring on the election. We want another election. 87% of the Liberals say, no, don't do it. 75% of NDP supporters said, don't do it. 51% of Green Party, and even 45% of the Bloc said, don't bring the government down. Now, I don't know if Mr. Blanchette or others are going to watch this and pay attention to this and let that influence how they're going to actually vote on this thing. Poilievre just jumps at the chance. This guy is still pissed off that Justin Trudeau wasn't the prime minister that he ran against in the election. He's even more pissed off that Mark Carney came in, won the leadership of the Liberal Party, and, of course, won the election. He lusts for power. So he puts out this video basically misrepresenting everything that's gone on in trade negotiations, ignoring the fact, as he always has, that the major stumbling block here with the fact that there is no deal between Canada and the U.S. is Donald Trump. Plain and simple. Trump is simply playing hardball, not in America's best interest either, because the stuff that he's employing right now, the tariffs, are actually hurting Canadian industries, but they're even hurting American industries more so. And he's oblivious to that. He doesn't give a damn. It's all about that lust for power. Now, that's something that Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Trump seem to share, that lust for power. And they don't care who they walk over and who they inconvenience or who they harm in that process. And that's dangerous. We've talked about the MAGA influence in this country right now, and it's real. And Poilievre, of course, is the personification of that MAGA influence in this country. He's got lieutenants within his party that are doing the same sort of thing, too. But we don't want to get hoodwinked into this. And for the love of Canada, really, we can't be complacent and think, well, it'll never happen here. Because we never thought it would happen in the States, and it's happening. We can't let this fall down. Yeah, these are tentative times. And yes, this budget's going to be very important, and so is the vote. And it's not just a matter of, hey, we want the Liberals to hang on. Canadians overwhelmingly, according to polling from not just Ecos, but so many other polling companies over the last little while, they're disenchanted because they wanted a deal, but they seem to understand it's because of what Donald Trump is doing. But they still have a great deal of faith and confidence in Prime Minister Carney to be the person to lead us out of this. We can't let that fall down, because the consequences of that, the consequences of another election, by the way, a very costly election, millions and millions of dollars, which may get us in the exact same position we are right now, just to satisfy Pierre Poilievre's ego, is really the wrong way for us to go. So we'll see what happens over the next little while in Parliament. We'll see what kind of reaction Poilievre's video gets. Invariably, if it's like most of the other things that he's done in the last little while, them that love him a lot. And I'm sure this is going to be, a big hit with the hardcore conservative Maple MAGA people. But the rest of Canadians are pretty much onto this guy, and that's good to know. But we need to stay and, steel our resolve here that that's not the kind of leader we want for this country. We have to make sure that that doesn't happen. Well, that's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks, as always, for being with us. If you're on YouTube, thank you for being with us. Hit that notification bell if you could. And as we mentioned, thanks again for those that are subscribing. You can do that before you sign off here today, too. Your support is extremely important to us, and we are extremely grateful for those that are jumping on side and subscribing to the podcast. Thanks to Madeline Kelly for the great work putting this one together. Until next time, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.